So, gaps in Western philosophy. Something is lost in the conversion process with Western abstractions. So, when jargon is used, it condenses things, but a bit like in physics, when one form of energy to another is converted, there's inefficiency lost. So there's energy lost in the conversion process. It's the same in philosophy with, say, a direct experience or phenomenology versus a Western abstraction. The abstraction creates this conversion process between the experience and the um, it creates a gap between the experience and the abstract terminology or jargon, um, and so energy, if you like, philosophical energy, is lost in that conversion process. So that's one thing I would say with Western thought. Um, the other is this sort of overexcited focus on physical matter, which is a convention, I would say, not necessarily the ultimate truth. In the same way that driving on the left hand side or the right hand side is the consistency that matters. So it's a convention, and it can be a useful convention, but it is nonetheless, you know, a convention. So a couple of gaps in Western philosophy would be the sort of abstraction slash conversion process energy loss. The other one would be a lack of acknowledgement of in what the Eastern school of thought or in Eastern philosophy they call the fifth element or the void, is kind of either ignored in Western thought or seen as negative. It's seen as sort of non-good, so it's either sort of ignored, which would be possibly classed as neutral, or it gets seen as a bad thing, like Nietzsche's staring into the void. So Western thought has this sort of fear of the void, but in Eastern thought, because in certain schools, because of a more holistic approach, they're sort of unified. So somethingness and nothingness. If you look at the Taijitsu, the circle, the black and white circle with the dots in it, it's somethingness and nothingness, sort of two halves of a coin. So it's a bit complicated to explain, but they don't have sort of a rigid name tag or a rigid sort of good bad assignment to the void or to lots of things. That I do notice in certain aspects, again, not all, but certain aspects of Western philosophy. So it tends in Western thought to sort of either ignore or shoot down or demonize things that it isn't interested in investigating. So I would say that pre-Socratics could absolutely be classed um, as Eastern philosophers, in terms of thought and practice, not necessarily nationality, but in terms of like the way they conducted their philosophy. Um, the pre-Socratics as a group, but also, to be specific, Heraclitus, also Diogenes, um, possibly Shakespeare with some of the writings like um, All of Life's a Stage, that kind of thing. These are quite Easterny kind of um, quotations. I'm not using great descriptions here, but I'm a bit struggling to come up with uh, concepts. So I'm doing my best. But I think the point is there are glimmers of it. But usually in Western thought, it classes things as artsy or airy. Um, you know, what do you call woo woo? It doesn't like if it it has a sort of bee in its bonnet about metaphysics, and a very strong obsession with physical matter, and again, these are sort of arbitrary conventions that again can come in very useful with like technology, Western medicine, but over focus with respect to them can lead to gaps in the philosophy. So that's my response, is that the abstraction, but then also the putting a negative name tag on the void when it doesn't have to have that. That's again just a sort of a human error, or a sort of ideological kind of opinion rather than a philosophical one. It's a sort of psychological issue or problem. So I think the other thing is they've had a lot longer in Eastern thought, because Chinese civilization being 5,000 years old and Hindu civilization being possibly older than that, quite a bit older. So I would say in general they've had more time to think about these things. So it could be a time issue. I don't know. It, if you were to be reductionist, which I don't like, you would say that Eastern is holistic and Western is isolationist or atomized. It takes components and sort of focuses on them, which again has very positive applications. But again, it's atomized when it goes too much. It isn't good. So Eastern would be holistic, Western would be isolationist or atomized, focusing on components. Another difference would be Eastern collectivist versus Western individual, which again there's a lot of sort of grey zone and nuance in that one. It's not a sort of hard set thing in concrete. The other thing would be sort of the Eastern would be more a feminine philosophy, and the Western masculine, again seen as. These again have a lot of nuance, but these are sort of the generalities. But the gaps are the abstraction, the void, and then a sort of shouting people down if they don't agree, which is more a religious kind of behaviour than a philosophical behaviour. But when humans practice any endeavour, you may risk sort of religious kind of, behaviour. So another example would be in materialism, demanding that the planet Neptune is non-conscious, but not providing evidence, just demanding it. And then if someone disagreed with the materialist viewpoint, then they would have to be shouted down. But again, that's a sort of an ideological point. It's not a scientific point. It's a sort of psychological problem, I would say, rather than a philosophical approach. So yeah, I think that kind of wraps it up. That would be it, really.